Well, before I go into that, I do want to just clarify for our listeners the difference between this story, which is a mythological story, and what we normally do, which is a fairy tale. So, usually, fairy tales are stories that are written by an author. Sometimes, a lot of times, actually, they're taken from folk tales, which are orally um, passed down from generation to generation. But fairy tales generally have an author, and we think of them in terms of stories that start off with once upon a time and end in happily ever after. Whereas mythological stories are quite different in that they are stories that are part of a society's religion. So if we think about, you know, Donna and I are both from the United States originally. Donna doesn't live there anymore, but oftentimes the Bible is often referenced. All the stories within the Bible would be considered mythology by other cultures, right? Because they are the story of a religion. But in the society that holds those stories as truth, right? People who believe in those stories wouldn't call them mythologies themselves. They would call them sacred text or
Nice
the word,
distinction, Vanessa. Nice
right?
distinction. But sorry, I stepped on you. They would
No, no,
call
no,
it
that's fine.
folklore, or what are the two things they might call it?
Sacred text or the word of God, or they would have different terminology that demonstrates that that is their religious truth, right? So usually a mythology is the other people's narrative for their religion, but if it is the narrative for your religion, it would have different terminology. So when we're talking about stories such as Sedna, this is a story that is not just a story to those people, right? It is their religious truth. It is something that they have belief in. And so I just wanted to clarify that this is something that we have to be uh, a little bit more cautious about when, because with fairy tales, these are things that people don't actually believe happened, right? But in religious stories, um, there's a little bit more being careful about that.
And actually, Vanessa, that's really, really interesting because we have entitled this podcast Sedna, the god, the Inuit goddess. And in
Right.
actuality, the Inuits don't believe in gods. They believe that they are living beings, living entities. And so it's our interpretation that she's a goddess. I don't know necessarily if they would call her a goddess.
I don't know either.